The sky over Benghazi was the color of old copper, stained with dust and heat even at 0530 hours. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly to the north, deceptively calm, a sheet of dark glass that reflected nothing but the memory of violence. On the packed dirt runway of the 376th Bomb Group, 9 consolidated B-24 Liberators sat in a ragged line, their olive-drab paint peeling in the African sun, their noses painted with names like Desert Rat, Sandman, and Susie Q. Lieutenant Robert Sarnosky stood beside the No. 3 aircraft, his flight jacket already soaked through with sweat. At 24, he looked older. Most bombardiers did after 6 months over the Reich's southern underbelly. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his plotting board for the 3rd time. The mission briefing had been short. Too short. Ploiești oil refineries. Romania. 800 miles of hostile airspace. Expected flak. Heavy. Expected fighter resistance. Extreme. Behind him, the ground crew chief, a staff sergeant from Oklahoma named Garrett, was slamming closed an access panel on the No. 2 engine. "She's running hot," Garrett said without looking up. "Probably won't make it past Crete." "She'll make it," Sarnosky said, though he didn't believe it. The B-24 was a workhorse, not a thoroughbred. Compared to the graceful B-17 Flying Fortress, the Liberator was a flying brick, longer, heavier, uglier. But it carried more bombs, flew farther, and when the war needed reach more than beauty, the B-24 got the call. This particular aircraft, tail number 42 to 40,794, had flown 21 missions. The number was painted in white stencil beneath the cockpit window. 22 was considered unlucky. Today would be 22. Pilot First Lieutenant Howard Shackelford climbed up through the nose hatch, his face already set in the stone mask he wore before combat. He was from Virginia, a tobacco farmer's son with a degree in agriculture and a talent for keeping broken things in the air. "Pre-flight's done," he said quietly. "We're 3rd in the formation. Stick close to the lead ship. If we lose an engine, we come home alone." "If we lose an engine over the Balkans, we don't come home," Sarnosky replied. Shackelford didn't argue. At 0612 hours, the first engine coughed to life. Then the second. The third. The fourth. The sound was apocalyptic. 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 radial engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, each screaming at a slightly different pitch. The propellers clawed at the air. The fuselage shook. Dust lifted in clouds around the landing gear. Sarnosky climbed into the nose, squeezing past the twin .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the plexiglass turret. The compartment smelled like oil, sweat, and fear. He strapped into the bombardier's seat and stared out at the horizon. Somewhere beyond that line, beyond the mountains and the plains and the rivers of blood-soaked Europe, men were already plotting their deaths. The aircraft lurched forward. The formation began to taxi. At 0641 hours, they were airborne. The mission clock started, and the sea below looked very, very far away. The formation climbed slowly, painfully, like an old man ascending stairs. 18 B-24s from the 376th, joined by 24 more from the 98th and 44th bomb groups, assembling into a loose combat box at 8,000 feet. The plan was to reach 22,000 feet before crossing the Yugoslav coast, high enough to avoid most flak, low enough to keep the engines from freezing. But the climb was sluggish. The aircraft were overloaded. Each carried 4,000 pounds of bombs, 2,800 gallons of fuel, and 10 men who weighed more than the mission planners had calculated. Sarnosky watched the altimeter creep upward. 9,000. 10,000. The air grew thinner, colder. His breath fogged the plexiglass. To his left, he could see the lead bomber, Teggy Ann, holding steady at the formation's tip. To his right, another B-24 wallowed in the slipstream, its No. 4 engine trailing a thin ribbon of black smoke. Ball turret to pilot, came the voice of Sergeant Ray Miller over the intercom. Miller was 19, a kid from Iowa who'd lied about his age to enlist. He was crammed into the spherical gun turret beneath the fuselage, rotating slowly, scanning the empty sky. "I've got a bad feeling about this one, sir." "Noted," Shackelford said. His voice was flat. "Keep your eyes open." At 11,000 feet, the No. 2 engine began to overheat. The cylinder head temperature climbed into the red. Shackelford reduced power, leaned the mixture, prayed. The temperature held. Barely. They crossed the Greek coast at 1,147 hours. Below, the landscape was a patchwork of brown and gold, burned fields, ruined villages, the scars of an occupied nation. No flak. No fighters. Just silence and the steady roar of engines. Sarnowski's hands moved automatically, checking his bomb sight, adjusting his calculations for wind speed and altitude. He'd done this 43 times in training and 21 times in combat. The mathematics were clean, almost comforting. Airspeed times time equals distance. Altitude divided by terminal velocity equals time to impact. If you got the numbers right, the bombs fell where they were supposed to. If you got them wrong, men died for nothing. At 1,223 hours, the fighters arrived. They came from above and behind, out of the sun. 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, painted in mottled gray-green camouflage, their noses flashing as they opened fire. Tracer rounds arced through the formation like angry fireflies. The bomber to Sarnowski's right shuddered. Its right wing suddenly punched through with holes the size of dinner plates. "Fighters! Fighters high 6 o'clock." Miller's voice cracked with adrenaline. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Lopez, swung his twin .50s upward and squeezed the triggers. The sound was deafening, a rattling thunder that shook the entire airframe. Brass casings rained down through the fuselage. The smell of cordite filled the compartment. A 109 flashed past, so close Sarnowski could see the pilot's face, young, pale, intent. The fighter rolled inverted and dove away, trailing smoke. Whether Lopez had hit him or the pilot was simply disengaging, Sarnowski couldn't tell. The attack lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, 2 B-24s were gone. One was spinning toward the Earth, its tail section blown completely off. The other was gliding in a slow, flat descent, 3 engines dead, already too low to jump. Shackelford's voice came over the intercom, steady as stone. "Tighten up. We're through the worst of it." But Sarnowski knew better. The worst was still ahead. At 1,340 hours, they reached the initial point, the last navigation checkpoint before the bomb run. Ahead, the city of Ploiești sprawled across the Romanian plain, its refineries belching black smoke into the afternoon sky. The target. The reason they'd come. The reason some of them would never leave. Sarnowski locked his bomb sight onto the lead aircraft. The formation began its final approach, straight and level, no evasion, no deviation. The flak batteries below opened fire. The sky turned black. The first burst was close. Close enough that Sarnowski felt the concussion through the aluminum skin of the aircraft, a deep whump that rattled his teeth and made his vision blur. Black smoke bloomed 200 feet ahead and slightly left, expanding into a dark flower that hung in the air like a curse. Then another burst. And another. Within seconds, the sky was a forest of explosions, each one lethal, each one reaching for them with invisible fingers of steel. The German 88mm flak guns were the most feared anti-aircraft weapons in the world, accurate up to 26,000 feet, firing shells that burst into thousands of white-hot fragments. The crews below didn't need to hit the bombers directly. They just needed to fill the sky with shrapnel and wait for the aircraft to fly into it. Flak. Heavy flak 12 o'clock level. Lopez shouted, though everyone could already see it. The formation pressed on. There was no turning back now. They were committed to the bomb run, locked into a straight course at 160 miles per hour, the doors of the bomb bay already open, the wind screaming through the fuselage. Any deviation meant the bombs would miss. Missing meant coming back. Coming back meant doing this again. Sarnosky hunched over his Norden bomb sight, trying to ignore the explosions. The optics were primitive but precise, a gyroscope-stabilized telescope linked to a mechanical computer that calculated the trajectory in real time. He adjusted the crosshairs, centering them on the refinery's central cracking tower. Range: 18,000 feet. Airspeed: 158 knots. Wind: 8 knots from the southwest. Steady. Steady. The number 3 engine exploded. The sound was catastrophic, a tearing shriek of metal followed by a deep, throbbing boom. The aircraft lurched violently to the right. Sarnosky was thrown against the side of the compartment, his head slamming into the plexiglass. Blood filled his mouth. He heard Shackelford shouting, heard the scream of the controls, felt the aircraft fighting itself. Engine 3 is gone. Fire. Fire in number 3. Feathering prop. Shutting down fuel. The right wing was burning. Flames streamed back from the engine nacelle, bright orange against the black smoke of the flak bursts. Shackelford fought the controls, using full left rudder and aileron to keep the aircraft level. The B-24 could fly on 3 engines. Barely. But not with a fire. Bombardier, abort the run. Shackelford's voice was strained, desperate. But Sarnosky didn't move. His hands stayed on the bomb sight. His eyes stayed locked on the target. They were 30 seconds from release. 30 seconds from making this hell mean something. Bombardier, did you copy? Abort. 20 seconds, Sarnosky said quietly. Another flak burst, this one so close that fragments tore through the nose compartment. A piece of shrapnel the size of a man's thumb punched through Sarnosky's left shoulder, exiting below his collarbone. He gasped, felt the hot wetness spreading across his chest, but kept his hands on the sight. 15 seconds. The fire in the wing was spreading, crawling toward the fuel tanks. If it reached them, the aircraft would disintegrate. Bombardier. 10 seconds. Shackelford stopped arguing. He held the aircraft level, holding it together through sheer will, giving Sarnosky the time he needed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward as 4,000 pounds of high explosive fell from the bomb bay. Sarnosky watched them go, 16 500-pound bombs, tumbling end over end, disappearing into the smoke below. He didn't see them hit. He didn't need to. The math was right. "Get us out of here," he shouted. Shackelford didn't wait for another invitation. He threw the aircraft into a steep banking turn to the left, away from the flak field, away from the formation, away from the target. The fire in the wing roared brighter in the turn, fed by the rushing air. The co-pilot, Lieutenant James Harmon, grabbed the fire extinguisher lever and pulled. Nothing happened. The fire didn't care. They were alone now. A single crippled bomber, trailing smoke and fire, limping away from the most heavily defended target in Europe. And they still had 800 miles to go. Below, a Bf-109 banked toward them, smelling blood. The fighter made one pass. Just one. Its guns stitched a line of holes across the top of the fuselage, from the tail to the cockpit. The rounds punched through aluminum like paper, severing hydraulic lines, electrical cables, hope. Lopez fired back from the top turret until his guns jammed. The 109 rolled away, climbing back toward the formation. It didn't return. Perhaps the pilot thought they were already dead. Perhaps he was right. Shackelford looked at the instrument panel and saw a nightmare. Number 3 engine. Destroyed. Number 2 engine. Overheating again, cylinder head temperature in the red. Hydraulics. Gone. Wing fire. Still burning, though slower now, starved of fuel. Airspeed, 140 knots and dropping. Altitude, 14,000 feet and dropping. "Give me a heading for home," Shackelford said. Sarnosky looked at his navigation chart with one working eye. The other was swollen shut from the head wound. His shoulder was numb, which was worse than pain. It meant something important had been cut. Blood soaked his flight suit. He plotted a course with shaking hands. 205 degrees. Southwest. It's 590 miles to Benghazi. We're not going to make it to Benghazi. Then we make it as far as we can. The aircraft staggered southwest, losing 100 feet every minute. The fire in the wing finally went out, not because they'd extinguished it, but because there was nothing left to burn. The engine was a blackened skeleton, the nacelle scorched and twisted. But the wing held. Somehow, impossibly, the wing held. At 1,512 hours, they crossed the Yugoslav coast and saw the sea. It looked different than it had that morning. Darker, colder, infinite. If they went down out there, no one would find them. The Mediterranean had swallowed thousands of aircrews and never given them back. "Number 2 engine is seizing," Harmon shouted. The cylinder head temperature had climbed past 300 degrees. The engine was eating itself, pistons grinding against cylinders, metal fusing to metal. Shackelford reduced power as much as he dared, but it wasn't enough. At 1,523 hours, the number 2 engine locked up with a sound like a car crash. The propeller froze. The aircraft shuddered. They were down to 2 engines. The B-24 could not maintain altitude on 2 engines. Not with this much damage. Not with this much weight. "Everybody out," Shackelford said quietly. "Bail out. Now." "No, sir," Lopez said from the top turret. "That's an order, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, fuck your order. We're staying." One by one, the crew checked in. Ball turret. Waist guns. Radio. Tail. All staying. All insane. All refusing to leave their pilot and bombardier. Sarnosky looked at Shackelford. Their eyes met. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say. They threw everything overboard. The .50 caliber machine guns, 200 pounds each. The ammunition cans. The flak vests. The survival kits. Everything that wasn't bolted down went out the waist windows and fell into the sea. The aircraft rose slightly. 50 feet. 100. Enough. At 1,600 hours, the sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the sea in shades of blood and gold. The coast of North Africa was still 200 miles away. They were flying at 3,000 feet, barely above stalling speed, the 2 remaining engines screaming at maximum continuous power. The airframe vibrated so violently that rivets were popping loose, falling away like metallic rain. "How much fuel?" Sarnosky asked. "Don't know," Harmon said. "The gauge was shot out. We're flying on fumes and prayer." At 1,647 hours, they saw land. A thin brown line on the horizon, shimmering in the heat haze. The coast of Libya. Home. The number 4 engine began to sputter. "Not yet," Shackelford whispered. "Not yet. Not yet. Not yet." The engine coughed. Caught. Ran for another 30 seconds. Coughed again. They crossed the coastline at 800 feet, so low they could see the faces of the ground crews looking up in disbelief. The number 4 engine died. The aircraft dropped like a stone. Shackelford pulled back on the yoke with both hands. The runway was ahead, packed dirt, wavy with heat, lined with wrecked aircraft and fire trucks. The main gear hit first, collapsing immediately. The aircraft slammed down on its belly, skidding forward in a storm of dust and sparks and screaming metal. It slid 300 yards before stopping. For a moment, there was silence. Then the crew began to move. Hatches opened. Men climbed out, staggering, bleeding, laughing, crying. Sarnosky was pulled from the nose by 3 ground crew who kept asking if he was okay. He wasn't. His shoulder was destroyed, his face a mask of blood. But he was alive. Shackelford was the last one out. He stood beside the wreckage and looked at what was left of tail number 42 to 40,794. The aircraft was twisted, burned, riddled with holes. It would never fly again. But it had flown long enough. 3 days later, Lieutenant Robert Sarnosky was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for refusing to abort the bomb run despite his wounds. He would fly 19 more missions before the war ended, and would return to Pennsylvania where he raised 4 children and never spoke about the war unless asked directly. Pilot Howard Shackelford received the Silver Star. He would die in 1953 in a crop-dusting accident in Virginia, the same quiet tobacco country where he'd learned to fly. The wreckage of 42 to 40,794 was stripped for parts and bulldozed into a pit at the edge of the airfield. No plaque marks the spot. But on that day, August 1, 1944, a B-24 Liberator crawled back across the Mediterranean Sea on 2 engines and willpower, carrying 10 men who refused to die. The oil refineries at Ploiești burned for 3 days. The war continued. The sea remained indifferent. And somewhere in the Libyan desert, under 30 feet of sand, the bones of a bomber rust in silence, still pointing home.